What is up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Superdraft Breakdown Show, where I'm going to be breaking down today's NBA slate over on Superdraft. If you haven't signed up for it yet, making bad life choices. Sign up using the promo code Grinders. Get a free 100% deposit bonus on your first $150. So basically how the promo works, you bet $150 or you deposit $150 onto Superdraft, or more than that, you get $150 in Super Cash. That's money that once you play through it once, it's yours. That's all you have to do. Free money, pretty simple. If you don't do $150 plus dollars, they'll match it up to $50. So deposit 40, you get $40. Deposit 50, you get $50. Anything below 50, you get a 100% deposit match. No drip, nothing. Just play through once and it's yours. And that's pretty much it. That's all you have to do. Free money, hop on there. And plus, there's a ton of overlay. They were partnered with Caesars Entertainment. That means the Caesars Entertainment that bought you Caesars Palace over in Vegas. Tons of resorts across the U.S. So you earn player points there. You earn all sorts of stuff. So get signed up. I'm going to be breaking down today's slate. I'll be breaking down slates multiple times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I believe, this week. So it is absolutely fantastic. My favorite place to win money. I won, I think, 10 grand last night. I don't know. There's plenty of edge to be had. There's less rake than anywhere else. There's overlay all over the place. They got cash games, tournaments for every buy-in level. So get signed up there. And if you have any questions, anything you need to know, drop them into chat here. I'm going to be getting to them throughout the show. But we got a nice little, 7, 8, 9. I can't even remember how many games slate. Today, it looks like it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 game slate. I think they have the first 2 games off the slate. So if you play over on FanDuel and DraftKings, worried about getting your lineups in over on Superdraft? Don't worry. They start an hour later. So the Milwaukee-Washington game off the slate, the Charlotte-Sacramento game off the slate. So you don't even have to worry about too many things because you got an extra hour to build because they start a little bit later. But we got a fun little 7-game slate today. Let's get started here. If you guys haven't played on before, it's all multipliers. So no worry about salary cap. Play whoever you want, any position. Go ahead and throw them in there. You get 3 guards, 3 forwards, 1 center, and you just throw them in there. Whatever they end up, multiply that times their multiplier, and that's how many points they get. So Jokic, 1x multiplier, he gets 60 points. That means he gets 60 points over on Superdraft. But a guy like Jeremy Grant over on Superdraft, 1.45x multiplier, he gets 40 points. That's actually 58 points over on Superdraft. So it's really nice. You can do any swap. Player gets ruled out 2 minutes before lock. It's pretty easy. You hop on there, you go to global player swap, and you swap them out to whatever player you want. It's that simple. And then you can make adjustments after that. But no worry about doing the 2v2 swaps. No worry about finding a direct pivot. No worry about any of that. Occasionally, you'll just leave money on the board over on DK. Not the problem over on Superdraft because every single player is realistically in play and you can swap over to them. But let's get started here with the breakdown. Again, get signed up using promo code Grinders. Get that free deposit bonus. Let's start off here with center. You only get 1 center, so this is generally the first one I go with. Because there's a whole lot of, if you play this guy, then you lose this guy. They tightened up salaries, or multipliers rather, a lot over the weekend. I think it's a lot better. I really like it. There's not those guaranteed plays. I got a nice little spreadsheet right here. All I'm doing is bringing in the RG projections, multiplying it by the multiplier, and that's where we have these median, floor, and ceiling projections here. They'll change throughout the day. Obviously, news coming out can make things drastically different. But we're going to work with what we got going right now, what we know right now, and that's kind of how we're going to play it. So as of right now, Jokic, the clear top option at center. Guys highlighted in blue, those are my cash game core. Guys highlighted in green, that's my tournament core. Not saying that guys that aren't highlighted in green aren't in play for tournaments, but these are just the main guys that I'm looking at the moment. So Jokic at the center position, clear top option for me. Guy I'm going to be using in cash. Matchup versus Indy, not bad, not great, just kind of mediocre, but he's at a 1x multiplier, and even at a 1x multiplier, he can crush. He can get 70 points easily. We see his median projection is 56. That means 50% of the time he's going to end up with 56 or more points. Highest on the board, slightly higher than Sabonis, but Sabonis has dual position eligibility, meaning you can play him at forward or center. So I'm probably going to be using him more on the forward position for cash, but in tournaments, I will have a decent amount of shares of him at the forward position because there is some upside with guys at the forward position. So I like Sabonis for cash, but I'm playing him at forward. Jokic is the clear top option for me at the center position in cash and one of the top options in tournaments, can get up 70, 80 points, can get a triple-double, can get all sorts of different things any given matchup. But with the tighter salary or with tighter multiplier structure that they put in lately, game stacks used to not be advantageous. I think 70% of slates, you end up with only one player from every single team. So you didn't have more than one player in any given lineup in the winning lineup on any given day. So just with the way the multipliers worked, the optimal lineup was almost always one player from each team because that player generally goes off. Now it's a lot tighter. So you can get multiple guys from the same team, multiple guys from the same game, and game stack it up and take down a tournament now because you don't have those 1.7, 1.8x multipliers. They're the clear top smash spot of the day. We had a little bit of that situation last night with Capella coming out. And so I was able to use Gallinari. I was able to use Collins in the same lineup. And I had pretty much them in almost every single lineup. And it made it easy because Gallinari was 1.8x multiplier, Collins was 1.4. With Capella out, meant more minutes for Collins, more usage for Collins, more boards for Collins, and Gallinari getting a little bit more extended run because they moved Collins to the 5, and Gallinari stayed at the 4. So now with the way they have multipliers, you can definitely look at game stacking more. I'm planning on looking at game stacking more because with everyone kind of being like I'm going to pull up everyone here on this sheet. And you see, normally we have a median projection for the top guy be like 4 or 5 more than the next closest guys. And you have multiple guys in the 60 range for median outcomes. Looking at this, the difference between the number 1 and number 20 player, 5 points in median projecting outcome. But I think I would assume that LeBron, that Jokic, that Kyrie are going to come in around 40, 50% ownership. 40 to 50% of the time, they're not going to beat a guy like Porzingis, a guy like Jamal Murray, a guy like Dennis Schroeder. So it definitely offers you a chance to get a whole lot more leverage, do a whole lot more game stacking than you have been able to in the past because we saw it yesterday. A whole bunch of blowouts, guys not getting full run for the fourth quarter. So chalky guys like Sexton, who was at 1.55x multiplier, not hitting because the game was a complete and total blowout. So it definitely offers a whole lot more strategy than we've seen in the past, but I'll go back to center now. After Jokic, Kristaps, decent spot going up against the Clippers. Not great, but not terrible. Ibaka might end up being out today. Could be a little bit of a bump for him, but 1.35x multiplier. We've seen him have 50-some-odd point games, and we could see that again tonight. He's a good play. I don't know if he's a great play, but he's definitely a guy I'll be using in my rotation. Randall, 1.15x multiplier, pretty low. But we've seen him put up triple doubles. We've seen him put up 65-point games. It's a matchup versus Brooklyn, which is obviously one of the best matchups you can get on the entire board. So he's a guy that's very much in play. Mason Plumlee, probably a guy that is either going to end up with a huge game or a not great game. They've been giving a little bit more run to Isaiah Stewart recently. Some of that has been because Plumlee's gotten in foul trouble, which is something we saw a lot with him earlier on in the season. The last game, didn't get in a ton of foul trouble and still, I think, was limited to 28 minutes. So he is someone that I will use in tournaments, predominantly in game stacks, because San Antonio, if DeRozan is in fact out, then San Antonio could end up with a lot of guys that are going to be in my build. So bringing it back with Plumlee, bringing it back with Jeremy Grant is a more advantageous position. But I'm a little bit worried about his minutes. He is in my tournament core because of this high multiplier, but will I end up with a ton of ownership in him? Probably not at this point because I am worried about his minutes. I expect him to be fairly heavily owned. Ayton going up against Memphis, always a guy that can get a ton of points. Superdraft has a similar scoring system to both DK and FanDuel. So like DK has the 3.5 points for three-pointers, has the same rebounds and assist rate for stats, but it also has the triple-double and double-double bonus. While over on FanDuel, you get the 3 points for the block, 3 points for the steal, and -1 point for the turnover. Same thing over on Superdraft. So it's a hybrid of the two. You can kind of go off of DraftKings or FanDuel's projection. You're going to get somewhat similar to what Superdraft projection would be if you're just looking at RG stuff, if you want to reference. So keep that in mind. But targeting guys at higher multipliers, guys that can get a ton of blocks, a ton of steals, shoot a lot of threes, it can be very advantageous. Also, looking at guys that get a bunch of turnovers you need to look at them, because if they're going to get 7-8 turnovers in a game, that's a lot worse over on Superdraft than it is over on something like DraftKings. Someone at a 1.5x multiplier who gets 5 turnovers, that's minus 7.5 points instead of the smaller amount it would be over on DraftKings. So something to keep in mind when you're looking at stuff over on Superdraft, realizing their floor, realizing their ceiling can be drastically changed by those steals, by those three-pointers, by those blocks, by those turnovers. So something to keep in mind where Aiden can get multiple blocks in a single game, and at a 1.55x multiplier, each one of those blocks are worth over 4.5 points. So something to keep in mind when you're drafting guys. Valanciunas, always a guy that can end up with a huge game. Multiplier is a little bit low, but not too low where I won't consider using him. Montrezl Harrell is a guy that I'm definitely looking at in tournaments a decent amount. 1.6x multiplier is high. We've seen him put an absolute dud in playing 20 minutes. We've seen him put an absolute monster game in playing 27, 28 minutes. He can be a huge contributor on a point per minute basis because of that. He's kind of in my builds. We see his median projection is only 48, but his ceiling is all the way at 68, one of the highest out of any of these guys. So he's a guy that I will be using in tournaments. Pirtle, if DeRozan's out, we already know LMA is out. It's going to be a huge factor if DeRozan does end up missing. It could be more of a factor for a guy like Derek White, a guy like DeJounte Murray. But Pirtle could end up with 30-plus minutes, 1.65x multiplier. He can get that double-double in that time and put up a pretty big outing. Not quite the same level as these guys, but I expect him to come in at 4% ownership. So he's a guy that's in play in tournament. Turner, always a guy that can hit some threes, get some blocks. So he's a guy that's in play in tournaments anytime. Could see some extended run. Versatile big, being on Jokic, just being on a guy that is in the game with the ball that much. Like, always adds the steal upside, always adds the block upside, but also takes away because he could get into some foul trouble. But he's a guy that I think can play. After that, not a ton I'm looking at. I would be interested in Nerlens Noel. I'm still slightly interested in him in a game stack. Brooklyn has been terrible versus bigs. Noel does get a ton of blocks and steals while he's in the game, and a 1.66 multiplier is a little bit low. But if he's going to be getting a bunch of minutes, he's definitely a guy that you can look at. But we see his median outcome of 37. You have a 37 in your lineup, your lineup's done in tournaments. Like, it's that simple. Like, with the way that Superdraft works, with everything that goes on with it, if you don't have every single guy in your lineup at least get 50, then you're kind of out of it in tournaments. One dud can crush you because there is no salary cap. You play everyone in your lineup. It's not like over on DraftKings, over on FanDuel, where you may have a super cheap guy that puts up a dud or all the studs put up a dud. It's literally you can play anyone. So last night I had one lineup that had one difference. Like, the difference between first and second, my winning lineup and the second place lineup was literally 1v1 swap between Collins and Carmelo Anthony. I had one that was in 30th place that was the exact same as my first place lineup. It had one guy different, and that was a whole 30-point difference because he only put up 28 points. I think Collins put up 58 points. So it's all 1v1 swaps in here that can make the difference between a losing night and taking down a GPP over on Superdraft. But that's pretty much it for center. Not that complex. A lot more interesting stuff at the forward and guard position. So we look at the forward position. This is my core as of right now for cash. Jeremy Grant, I think, will stay in there regardless. I don't think I'm changing my cash game lineup out with him. He's just going to be in there almost no matter what. 1.45x match versus San Antonio. Not a bad matchup. Multiplyer's too high. We know that he's largely scoring dependent, so he can have a little bit of volatility. But the floor's there, the ceiling's there. He can crush, and I plan on using a ton of him in tournaments, and I plan on using him in cash. Sabonis, definitely a guy that I'll end up with. Normally offers you about a 40-point floor. Like, he's been a little bit rough recently, but offers you a floor, offers you a ceiling. Matchup versus Denver, not too bad. Obviously, they're not as bad of a defensive team as they were at the beginning of the season, but they're still not a great defensive team. So Sabonis, a guy that I'll likely use in cash. Then the third spot becomes a little bit tricky. As of right now, I have LeBron there. Matchup versus Golden State. Not a great defensive matchup, or not a great defense in Golden State. Very high-paced team, so should be a lot of scoring. LeBron being the main contributor there. He's the likely guy I have, but I'm not going to argue with Luca even at a 1x multiplier. Kawhi, I'm not going to argue with. On the second minute back-to-back, we don't know if George or Kawhi is going to sit. So if one of them ends up sitting, the other one probably goes into the cash game lineup for me and extended him out in GPPs. But as of right now, it's probably LeBron, but I'm not going to argue with Luca, with Kawhi, with Randall, with Paul George, with any of these guys. But LeBron's the most likely candidate, even at a low multiplier. We'll get past that. Like I said, Luca always offers you 70-point upside, even in a tough matchup versus the Clippers. Kawhi always offers you a big ceiling, but he was in a blowout last night, so I expect him to play because they didn't get run in the fourth quarter. But 1.2x multiplier offers you a 65, 70-point ceiling. Randall already talked about him. Plumlee already talked about him. Paul George, he's fine. Like match versus Dallas. Obviously, Dallas is one of the worst defensive teams in the league. Great matchup for Paul George. He can get hot from behind the arc. He can get a bunch of steals, which makes his ceiling even higher with the 3.5 points for a three-pointer and 3 points for blocks and steals. Draymond is one of my favorite tournament targets. 1.5x multiplier. We've seen him put up multiple triple doubles this season. We've seen him put up 18 assist games. Wiseman coming back changes his role a little bit, but he's still a guy that I definitely want to have a decent amount of because he always has the ability to get 4, 5, 6, 7 steals. Just absolutely pack in those numbers. And at 1.5x multiplier, his volatility just goes through the roof and can end up with a 80-point game with this multiplier. RJ Barrett, guy that likes to chuck going up against Brooklyn, high-paced matchup, bad defensive matchup. We can see Barrett get into the 40, 45-point range and at 1.65x multiplier. He's a guy that I definitely want to use. Kelton Johnson, largely dependent on if DeRozan doesn't end up playing. But if DeRozan doesn't end up playing, Kelton Johnson can either do nothing or do a ton in any given game. We've seen him put up multiple different 45, 50-point matchups, and he's at a 1.7x multiplier. If he has one of his big games, you're probably not winning a GPP without it. It's that simple. Like, he's a guy that can absolutely smash a given matchup. He can also get destroyed. So vary your exposure by that and maybe bring it back with a guy like Jeremy Grant, bring it back with a guy like Plumlee. Although there's no guarantee that even if the game does stay close and he ends up with 35 man say, he ends up putting up a huge outing. It's just the more likely scenario. Montrezl Harrell, already talked about him. Wiggins just doesn't seem to be doing a ton. Not really a guy I want to use. 1.7x multiplier, I'm not going to argue with it, but not someone that's coming into my play. Michael Porter Jr., absolutely fantastic play. We know that he can get just a huge amount of fantasy points on any given night. Always in play on GPPs on other sites. With this multiplier, hugely in play on GPPs for Superdraft. Can end up with a 50-point night if he gets hot shooting the ball. He can, if he puts up 20 shot attempts, he's almost certainly going to crush this multiplier. Saddiq Bey, guy that can get a whole bunch of blocks, whole bunch of steals, and likes to shoot the ball from behind the arc. Gives him more upside at 1.8x multiplier. Every three-pointer makes. That's essentially 6 points. So we've seen him multiple times put up 11 three-point shot attempts. We've seen him in those times put up 3 3-pointers and shoot terribly. We've also seen him put up 7 or 8 3-pointers in a single game. So because of that, a whole lot of volatility, not going to be heavily owned. I don't expect a lot of people to have him, but he's a guy that will definitely be in my mold. Oubre, 1.55x multiplier. One of the more inconsistent guys on the entire board. So he's a guy that I think you can play in tournaments. Probably not making it into a ton of my builds outside of stacks where I'm bringing it back with Schroeder. I'm bringing it back with LeBron. So, and I'm probably not playing Steph because they kind of have a negative correlation because Oubre just seems to do a bunch of stuff on offense randomly when Steph's having a cold night. Dylan Brooks, guy who loves to chuck and get a few steals, 1.6x multiplier, even in a matchup versus Phoenix, a guy that I could see using. Outside of that, not a ton of guys. Like Gay can always have a big night. Joe Harris can always have a big night, but it's a slow matchup here. Tim Hardaway can always put up a whole bunch of shots, but most of these guys just don't really make it for me. The downside's far too low, and the upside really isn't as high as you want it to be. If they're at higher multipliers, maybe Joe Harris at a 2x multiplier would be in play, but more than likely not a guy I'm going to be using. So my core here for forwards is pretty much these guys up here. So let's move on over to guard. Again, guys, you got any questions, go ahead, drop it into chat. I'll try and get into it. Eric Johnson already has a question. Who are the main targets for the Spurs for tonight? It's White, it's Murray, It's Kelton Johnson, it's Pirtle, and it's probably my favorite is Murray, followed by Kelton Johnson, followed by White. We saw White put up a big night, but with the Spurs, it always seems to be one random guy that ends up putting up a huge outing, especially if DeRozan's out. All of them get an uptick. All of them can end up hitting, especially with their high multipliers. But if DeRozan doesn't end up playing, then those are your main targets. It's White getting an increase in minutes. All the guys getting an increase in usage. Maybe Kelton Johnson getting some extended run. But all these guys are hugely volatile because Pop just does Pop things with his players. So any one of those guys are very much in play in tournaments are going to be cores in my builds if DeRozan ends up missing. But we look at guard here. Clear top options are Kyrie and Harden, even in a match versus New York. I don't know if I'll end up using both of them in cash. I'll probably end up using one. I might split my cash game lineups depending on how much I have in play for cash between these two guys because I think one of them gets it done. Just a match versus New York is always a low scoring matchup. They just play at such a slow pace, and they're so good defensively so far this season that I don't think there's a chance that both of these guys end up hitting, although there's always a possibility with Brooklyn that both these guys end up hitting. But I'll probably use one or the other in cash. Booker's definitely a possibility as high multiplier. Good matchup versus Memphis. Morant's probably my favorite play, though. Morant has been good and bad at times, but he's been involved in a lot of blowouts. If this game ends up staying close, he's definitely a guy that I'm going to be using a lot in game stacks with Valanciunas, with Ayton, with Booker, with Chris Paul. If this game stays close, Morant has a chance to put up 50 fantasy points at 1.4x multiplier. He could be the top scoring guy on the entire Superdraft slate. So he's a guy that I am going to use in cash, and I'll probably use it a lot of in tournaments and probably use a lot of game stacks. After that, I already talked about Luca. Steph, we always know he can put up 70 in any given night. Before his multiplier 1.15x. Offers you a big ceiling. Lakers, obviously not the same defensive team without Anthony Davis in there. So he's a guy that always offers a big ceiling, especially with all the three-pointers. He can get hot from behind the arc and just crush. So he's a guy that I will be playing in tournaments. DeJounte Murray, already talked about him with DeRozan out. Likely a guy that'll get a big usage uptick. Can always just fall flat any given night, but he's worth it with his 1.4x multiplier, one of the highest ceilings on the board. We look at ceiling here. Outside of Kyrie, he has the highest ceiling of anyone on the slate. Jamal Murray had a big stretch where he was just crushing. He looked like he looked in the bubble. I think they still has the possibility of doing that any given night, has the possibility of putting up 50, 55 points. Multiplier is far too high for him given his ceiling. He's going to be a mainstay in my tournaments and lineups where I'm not using Joker, even though they can both crush together. I'll be using him if I'm not using Joker in most of my lineups. Schroeder, high multiplier, matchup versus Golden State, high pace. I will end up using a decent amount of him. Quickly is the interesting one. If Elf Payton's ruled out, then I could see him getting a little bit of extended run, although Tibbs, I don't know what he's doing with him. I don't understand. Quickly, he's just a guy that pisses me off on a nightly basis. But while he's in there, getting run in this with a second unit, absolutely crushes, eats up all the usage. If he gets hot shooting, then he can end up with a 40-point night here. 1.7x multiplier, definitely in play for me. Will probably be a decent staple, especially in a matchup versus Brooklyn, where he's out there running with a second unit where it's just not good defensive unit. I'll be using a decent amount of him. Chris Paul in play. I like Booker better because he's at a slightly higher multiplier. DeLon Wright's fine. Can always put up a 50-point outing, but I prefer Grant. I prefer Plumlee. He's in play. Brogdon, I think you can definitely use. Matchup versus Denver, if the game stays close, he's mostly a guy I'll be throwing in game stacks with Jamal Murray, with Sabonis, with Jokic, trying to get the close game there, high-scoring game. He can get hot from behind the arc, 1.4x multiplier. We know he's going to play a boatload of minutes. He's a guy that's in play. Already talked about Barrett, Kelton Johnson. Derek White had a massive night the other night, could have a massive night again. Does a lot on the defensive end. Going up against Detroit, not a great team, so this game could end up turning a blowout. A guy I'll definitely be using in game stacks, but you're mostly hoping that he gets a few steals, gets hot shooting from behind the arc, because that's going to end up just boosting his points ton, because that high multiplier, every single steal is now worth 5 points. Every single three-pointer is worth 5.5 points. So Derek White, definitely a guy that you should get some exposure to. After that, really, really drops off. Like, I don't really see many guys. Josh Jackson, obviously gets some extended run in case of a blowout. High multiplier, can shoot the ball a ton, but not really a guy I want to use. Dylan Brooks, already talked about him. Brandon Clark, if he sees 30 minutes, he can crush, but I don't think he's going to. Just looking down, not really any guys. Maybe Reggie Jackson, Pat Bev out, could potentially be in for a big game. He can always eat up a bunch of usage. If Paul George or Kawhi ends up getting ruled out and Pat Bev's already out, that means he can end up with a big game. Same thing with Lou Will, but as of right now, just not guys that are into my build. Brunson, unless Luca gets ruled out, he's not in play. KCP can always put up a massive outing, but more than likely just going to put dud after dud. So not someone I want to use. All these guys just don't end up making my build. It's that simple. It's these guys you want up here. And I would suggest using either Kyrie or Harden in most every single lineup because one of them is likely to go off for a big game. Although if you want to fade both of them, it's match versus New York. Game could end up being a blowout. Game's going to be slow-paced on the New York side. They're good defensively. So there's no guarantee that these guys end up going off. So if you fade them, any one of these other guys down here can end up with a 60-point game before their multiplier. So with their multiplier, they can end up crushing Harden, end up crushing Kyrie. I still plan on having a decent amount of exposure to him, but not nearly the amount I need to. QQ in chat, do you think J-Val's minutes remain same, seeing about 30 the last few games? J-Val's minutes are an entire mystery to me. I have no idea. No one really knows on any given night. They do tend to run a bigger rotation with all their guys healthy, but it's still like J-Val's minutes are entirely up in the air almost every single night. Yes, you can guess 30, but he can end up with 35. He could end up with 25. We don't know on any given night. It's just tough. I want to fade quickly. He plays for he's not named Randall. Yeah, you can fade quickly. I mean, he's not going to be heavily owned. It's entirely a shot in the dark, but he could end up with a big outing. Looks like that's all the questions we got, guys. Again, if you haven't played, pretty much gave you all the information you need. Get signed up using promo code Grinders. Deposit $150, get $150. That's simple. Deposit up to $50, get that matching amount. Get signed up. It's one of the best places to play. There's going to be overlay tonight, like there is pretty much every single night. You get to see his entertainment points, so play enough. And, I mean, at this point, I pretty much, once they get the systems merged, I'm going to have elite diamond status. I'm going for 7-star status. Always wanted top-tier status at a casino. Never got top tier. Always got second to top-tier status. So now that's what I'm going for. That's what I'm trying for. That's why I'm playing over on Superdraft partly. Not only is it a great place to make money, but I'm going to have lavish Vegas vacations once COVID kind of gets over with. And with that partnership, you'll be able to play DFS likely over in Nevada, which is always something that pisses me off because I have to drive 45 minutes to the fudging border every single day to put in my lineups. It's a pain. You don't want to waste an hour and a half of your day just to put in lineups, just driving all the way down to California. No, with this partnership, they should be in Nevada soon enough. So maybe that's just speculation, but I think that's one of the big perks of the partnership. So, yeah, guys, get signed up using promo code Grinders. Hopefully you enjoyed the show. I'm getting out of here. Good luck on your contest tonight. See you, kids.